Dan the fisherman had always been drawn to the sea. He grew up in the small coastal town of Newquay, Cornwall, where the rugged cliffs met the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. From a young age, he would accompany his father on fishing trips, learning the art of casting nets and handling lines. But it was the lure of the lobsters that truly captured Dan's imagination. The lobsters of Cornwall were legendary, known for their sweet, succulent meat and prized golden roe that only females possessed. Dan heard the tales of fishermen who had dedicated their lives to hunting these elusive crustaceans, and he longed to join their ranks. So, when Dan turned 18, he bought himself a small fishing boat, which he christened the Tizard Leon, after the cove where he had spent many happy hours as a child. He equipped the boat with all the necessary gear, traps, buoys, and a sturdy cage to hold his catch, and set out to make his fortune as a lobster fisherman. At first, the going was tough. Dan spent long hours on the water, braving unpredictable Cornish weather and the constant threat of rogue waves. But he was determined to succeed, and soon learned the habits of his quarry. He discovered that lobsters were most active at dawn and dusk, and they preferred rocky outcrops and crevices where they could hide from predators. Armed with this knowledge, Dan began to hone his skills as a lobster hunter. He learned to set his traps in the right places, using bait that would attract lobsters without attracting unwanted species like crabs and starfish. He also became adept at handling lobsters themselves, using a special tool to measure their carapace and ensure that they were of legal size. As the months passed, Dan's catches grew bigger and more consistent. He became a skilled navigator, able to navigate the treacherous waters around Newquay with ease. He also developed a keen eye for the signs of lobsters, the shadows that moved beneath the waves, the flickers of movement in rocky crevices. Word of Dan's success spread, and soon other fishermen were coming to him for advice on lobster fishing. Dan was happy to oblige, sharing his knowledge and experience with anyone who asked. He believed that the more lobster fishermen there were, the better it would be for the industry as a whole. But Dan's greatest achievement came one day when he was out on the Tizard Leon, checking his traps as usual. As he hauled up one of the pots, he felt a heavy weight on the line, much heavier than any other lobster he had caught before. He braced himself, wondering what monster could be lurking in the depths. When he finally pulled the trap aboard, he was astonished to see a gigantic lobster. Its carapace was at least 2 feet wide. Dan knew at once this was a once-in-a-lifetime catch, a lobster of such size and quality that it would fetch a small fortune at market. With trembling hands, Dan measured the lobster and confirmed it was well over the legal size limit. He then placed it gently in his cage, taking care not to damage its delicate legs. As he set off for shore, he could hardly believe his luck. When Dan arrived at market, a crowd quickly gathered around his cage, marvelling at the size and beauty of the lobster. The market owner offered Dan a princely sum for the creature, but Dan held out for more, knowing this was a lobster of unparalleled quality. In the end, Dan sold the lobster for a small fortune, enough to buy himself a new boat and expand his operation. He became known as the most successful lobster fisherman in Cornwall, and other fishermen looked up to him as a mentor and a friend. As for the Tizard Leon, it continued to ply the waters round Newquay, carrying Dan and his crew on countless adventures. For Dan, the sea was just more than a source of livelihood. It was a lifelong passion, a calling that shaped his identity and given him a purpose. And as long as there were lobsters in the water around Cornwall, Dan would be there to catch them.